Hi, welcome everybody. So our topic for today is the S in ESG. How much impact can NEDs have when signing off a modern slavery policy? Brilliant thing about today is Stephen is talking about an actual experience he has had on the board. Quite often, people don't feel comfortable doing that. The real benefit for Stephen is that he's on a public sector body where all of this is out in the open. So he is able to talk more freely. And I really appreciate that, Stephen. Thank you. He'll be sharing the story of his experience with Scottish Water. How one board meeting, which was intended to be a simple policy sign-off, became a significant turning point for the organisation. Stephen's a non-exec for Scottish Water and the Scottish Courts Tribunal Service. He's a member of the Armed Forces Pay Review Body and a member of the Board of Trustees for the BT Pension Scheme Trustees Limited. Stephen, thank you. Over to you.
Thank you so much for welcoming me along and inviting me along to speak. It really is a pleasure. ESG has been around for a long time. If anyone thinks back to the apartheid regime in South Africa, when General Motors actually came up with some policy statements about how they would actually kind of trade with or not with South Africa, it was known as the Sullivan Principles. That type of ethical trading has been around for a long, long time, even if it hasn't been called ESG. And ESG originally started, I think, in the finance sector about financial investments and making sure that ethical trading actually happened. And then it's just, it's now an all-encompassing kind of broader spectrum about working conditions, diversity, equality, inclusion, and talking about conflicts and humanitarian crises. And that's all to do with employees, but equally it's all to do with supply chain as well. So when we talk about social, we're not just talking about our employees and who we directly trade with, it's right through our supply chain. And one of the things that got brought to our board was our annual attestation of the kind of modern slavery statement stroke policy. The modern slavery is a kind of broad brush kind of term, it covers forced labour, servitude, slavery, human trafficking and debt bondage and forced marriage and all of that type of stuff there and child labour. And along with that presentation came a little bit about ethical supply chain. And during the course of that presentation to the board, it became quite apparent that our modern slavery policy, which was fine, it's all legal, it's all above board, it meets all the standards that are out there from government, it didn't fit with what we were being told by our management team about supply chain, particularly in relation to a chemical called polysilicon. And polysilicon, if you don't know, is actually a key component of photovoltaics or solar panels. And the vast majority of those actually go through or pass through China. And one region of China, the Xinjiang region, there's been lots of studies into that about slave labour camps, etc. The United Nations have published stuff on it as well. And they've actually got their own statements on slave labour. And one of the images that our people put up on the screen was actually people that were all sitting down in a row with the same coloured suits on, heads shaved, they were all Uyghurs. And I remember at the time having the actual debate around about the board there about and what we actually do, because a number of choices were put in front of us about what we do next. And I remember writing down, and my fellow board member who's on here will probably remember me doing this, but you probably can't see it on here, but it actually says the word Birkenau in there. And that's the first word that I wrote down when I was putting that presentation up. And someone said, "What's Birkenau?" I said, "Sorry, that's actually the technical name for the second Auschwitz camp during the Second World War." And I says, "Those people look exactly like the images that you actually see there." And I said, and to be honest with you, I says, "I can't put my name to anything that modern slavery or otherwise when we've actually got this dilemma in front of us here." Now, a number of things were put in front of us as a board, a number of key decisions there. Continue to invest, as we were doing in biophotovoltaics, continue with the programme, but publicly call it out. Now, you have to bear in mind that what we and everyone else who buys photovoltaics and solar panels, whatever you want to call them, we're not actually breaking any laws, international laws, by doing that, as long as we can reasonably assure ourselves that we're doing all that we can. So, nothing we were doing was actually illegal at all, and it's still not technically illegal to buy solar panels, even though they are linked to modern slavery. So we can continue to invest and see our programmes, bearing in mind that our executive leadership team, and indeed us as a board, we had set targets about how much renewable energy we would generate during our regulatory period, and also our net zero target. And the other option that was put in front of us, one of the key options, was to suspend what it was that we were doing and then try and find different ways of actually meeting these targets. And that proved an interesting debate, I think it's fair to say, because we were basically actually putting the brakes on an entire programme and an entire part of our incentive plan to meet net zero in order to find a different way of doing things. So we decided that we really need to put the brakes on everything. We just kind of stopped the debate and said, listen, we need to go back and get more information on that. And we need to go and have a rethink about our net zero pathway. And we were also going to lose money on it, I think it's fair to say, because if you stop putting in photovoltaics and you've put in a place of plan to generate your own electricity, and just by way of information, Scottish Water is one of the biggest users of electricity that you will find, or water companies are, because to pump billions of litres of water and wastewater around about a network requires a lot of electricity. So as much of that as we can get under renewables as possible and under our own steam meant that we can actually not only save the planet, which actually is the key thing, but we could also save ourselves money as well in terms of electricity we were buying off the grid. And we were talking about lots of millions of pounds per annum that we were actually going to put the brakes on. And we planned for all of this. This was all part of our investment programme. So you can understand to a certain degree that there was a fair degree of resistance to suspending anything that was actually there. And a number of robust debates were actually had around about the room. And I think it's fair to say that credit to all the non-execs who were actually in the room, and one of them's actually on here on the call, who was also a keen advocate of actually pausing everything that we were doing and going and having a reset. And I think that that's actually what we did, in essence, to cut the whole debate short. We actually paused the installation of new photovoltaic projects until we could find better ways of actually doing that. Now, we talked about a number of technical things. We let all of our scientists and everyone else go away and come up with different ways of doing that. We also had to look at different ways of how we could meet net zero. If any of you know Scottish Water, we own a large amount of land in Scotland. I think it's 22,000 hectares or something like that, and that we actually own within our catchments. And one of the ways of actually redoing our net zero was to go and have a look at whether we could actually accelerate other parts of our net zero plans. So, for example, we are planting somewhere in the region, I think it's about 20 million trees around about the Loch Katrine catchment area, which is like thousands of football pitches worth of trees. So that's another way of actually meeting our net zero ambitions, and we're accelerating that instead. We're also having a look at other technologies, and we're also trying to work with other suppliers in order to be able to still meet that. I think what's really important here is that from a board perspective is that it's not to be scared to make a difficult decision, even in the face of pressure. So you've clearly got something that's presented to you that's going to cause enormous difficulties to your organisation, and perhaps some of the personalities in the room in terms of the bonus that they might take home or whatever else it happens to be. If it's the right thing to do, then do not be scared to do the right thing. Now, I think that what's happened recently in the last week or so is that this debate actually happened around about May 2023, just to be clear. You can actually see the outcome of that debate on Scottish Water's website. There's a video there from Alex Plant, our CEO. It tells you about our modern slavery and what the board's role, etc., was in actually coming to where we are now. But interestingly, the UK government are now looking very closely and very seriously at doing what Scottish Water did a year and a half, 2 years ago, in terms of that really, really difficult decision about actually changing a direction of travel. We're almost balancing two different sets of ethics. We need to save the planet, so we need to put in photovoltaics, but equally, we need to do it in a way that's actually not going to enslave people and actually going to do it to the right ethical and modern standards. And how do you actually change a part of the world that is really, really difficult to change? We had lots of debate there. There's lots of you on here, maybe on mobile devices. All the chemicals in your mobile devices, for example, probably come from mines, cobalt and other precious metals and minerals that probably have some kind of semblance of poor S in the ESG and probably very poor E in the ESG. But we all buy mobile phones, we all do that. And that was one of the arguments that people put, was that, well, we can't change the world. No, you're right, we can't actually change the world, but we can actually change the bit that we can change. And I think that was really, really important to us. So I'm delighted to be able to say that Scottish Water were an absolute exemplar when it came to that. And I was delighted eventually that the UK government caught up with us. It took a year and a half to 2 years. But equally, I'd much rather be sitting in this position now saying that, not looking at the UK government and saying, oh, I wish we'd taken that decision 2 years ago to pause photovoltaics. We're actually in a position of actually saying, you know what, we did that, and everybody else is now beginning to follow suit. So that's a really, really brief kind of whistle-stop tour of the S from a live example. Anyone wants to look further about it, look at the Scottish Water website. A link will be shared later on to Alex's video. and our policy and the decision that we actually took there, and one that we are immensely proud of as an organisation.
Thank you, Stephen, for sharing that with us. There'll be lots of other organisations have to be thinking about it too. So getting this video out there will help other NEDs in considering where their boards are at. Some of you may not be purchasing solar panels or parts for solar panels, but you might be purchasing something else from other parts of the world and curious about how those supply chains are working. So we want to get you thinking about your boards and your situations now. So we've got 3 questions. How have you found signing off policy documents? Do you feel confident in the ethics of your board's supply chain? And thirdly, how have you found speaking up when you disagree? So we're going to take a few minutes now to have a think about each of those questions before we jump into breakout rooms.